Well, I would like to welcome everybody to today's Chamber to Community, or C2C Back to Business NWA series, where we're going to be talking about legal considerations and things to consider as your businesses gets reopening. Joining us today are two attorneys from the Friday firm. We have Katie Campbell is going to be joining us here in a few minutes, and then Michael Moore is also going to be speaking. Mike's going to be kicking it off, but before we get started, I do want to thank all of our sponsors for today's event, Cox Communications for sponsoring all of our C2C programming, as well as any other, pardon me, I had something pop up here. All right, I also want to thank Cox Communications as well as all of our chamber members that are helping us as we get through this time. We are going through, the chamber's doing everything we can to assist our businesses. The world has completely changed, but Northwest Arkansas and businesses around the state of Arkansas have stepped up and have done a great job, and our communities, I think, are coming out stronger than when we went in. So I do want to turn it over real quickly to Mike, but before so, want to read the biographies of who's going to be speaking today. Katie Campbell, she is an associate in the litigation practice group at Friday, Eldridge & Clark, and is a litigation counsel for individuals and businesses in complex business and commercial disputes, including employment claims, collective active wage and hour claims, and breach of contract. She graduated summa cum laude from the University of Arkansas Law School, where she was also the editor-in-chief of the Law Review, and has her degree from the University of Georgia. So honestly, Katie, which one do you like better, bulldog or hog? I got to ask.
I'm a hog fan at heart.
There we go. All right. And our other speaker today is Mike Moore. Mike is a partner in the Labor and Employment Practice Group with an emphasis on wage and hour collection action employment discrimination defense. He is as well with Friday, Eldridge & Clark, and his biography is very, very robust. You were a 6-year the chair of the Arkansas Judges and Lawyer Assistant Program. You're on the Arkansas Supreme Court Committee in the lawyer well-being, serving on that committee for the Arkansas Supreme Court. You do have a degree, both bachelor's and JD from the University of Arkansas Law School. So thank you, Katie and Mike, for being with us today and helping out on today's webinar, C2C Back to Business NWA. And I'll turn it over to you guys. I know you have a presentation ready for us.
Thanks, Steve. Wonderful to be with you all today. And I was talking to somebody earlier today about what life has been like the last couple of months, and Katie and I have been working together real closely on a lot of different issues, and I said it's been unbelievably stressful because we keep getting bombarded with different things that we're having to learn on the fly, and but it's also very rewarding because we've gotten to help a lot of people figure out how to weather this storm the best they can. And I'll tell y'all what I tell everybody every day is that we are all just flying by the seat of our pants right now because what the rules are today are going to change tomorrow. What Congress adds to the mix is going to change the way everybody has to do business going forward. So with that said, what we're talking about with y'all today a little bit is what considerations you have in bringing people back to work. We spent a lot of time in the first 4 or 5 weeks of this mess trying to tell people how to get people laid off or reduce their hours and make those things happen the best. And now we're turned around with people starting to come back to work, and how do we do that? So summarize a couple of the original issues that we had with people being off, because as we start to return people back to work who have been laid off, we've got to consider whether they're going to be entitled to any of the leave provided for by Congress. So let's, Katie, if you can move, there we go. So as I call it, FAFICRA, and most people call it Families First, that is the law that was passed way back when. Seems like months and months ago, but was actually 2 months ago yesterday. This is the Family First Act, which was Congress's actually second effort but first major effort to address the pandemic and its impact on employees and employers. It is now in effect until the end of the year, and it provides basically for paid leave under certain circumstances for employees. It provides for emergency paid sick leave and emergency family medical leave, and which is not really family medical leave as we all know it. Applies to anybody under 500 that paid sick leave, and it doesn't matter how long they work for you there, they are eligible for that paid sick leave. So 6 reasons for that: if there's a quarantine order, if the employee's been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine, if the employee is experiencing symptoms and seeking diagnosis. Remember that one for a minute. Employee caring for let's go to 4. Yeah, employee caring for an individual who's subject to a quarantine order, needed to care for a child because the daycare is out or provider unavailable, or that they are experiencing substantially similar conditions specified by HHS, Treasury, and Labor. So basically, if somebody says that they are experiencing symptoms and seeking treatment or diagnosis, then they're entitled to this paid sick leave. And so they have to be put on the paid sick leave subject to the possibility that they weren't quite telling the truth and they weren't actually seeking diagnosis. For most employers, they simply have to give the 2 weeks leave, and ultimately they may change whether that's payable or not. Let's move on to the amounts. Yeah. So if it's my sickness, then I get 100% pay for that 2 weeks up to a max of 511. If it's because I got a kid issue or somebody in my family's sick and I'm staying with them, I only get a $200 a day cap. You can supplement that with other forms of paid leave. And it's available to part-time employees as well on a pro rata basis. And I want to tell y'all, I'm going through these a little bit quickly because I want to talk more about the nuts and bolts of how to get people back to work. These paid sick leaves may be something that when you recall somebody to work, they say, I can't because, and that's when we're going to have to go back to and study whether they're eligible for the emergency paid sick leave or the emergency family medical leave extension. All right. And they are only eligible for this if they are unable to work from home. And of course, many of y'all have had many people working from home up to now with varying degrees of productivity. One thing I neglected to say at the beginning is that if you have questions and or comments, please put them in the chat box. I think that'll go to Steve, and then at the end we can deal with those. If something, when Katie and I are talking, somebody has something they need to talk about right then, hit it in the chat box and we can talk about it. So one of the things I'd be interested in comments, since we have a reasonably small group, is put comments in your chat if you've had people working from home, if you think that has been successful or not, because that's going to be a challenge we all have going forward. All right, so let's move along to the fun stuff. Now that the governor said it's okay, how do we reopen? When do we reopen? So as I said a few minutes ago, there are no hard and fast rules, and we are all flying by the seat of our pants. But if you look at, you can link on here the CDC guidelines for places of employment, and I frankly like the OSHA guidance, and I couldn't my technological capabilities are limited, but the document, if you search that, there's a PDF document on the OSHA website, which has lots of wonderful guidance for employers. Two things. Number one, there aren't any rules. Number two, if you don't follow the OSHA guidance, follow the OSHA guidance, you are doing so at your own risk later on. So that's what we've been doing to try and set up return to work policies and conditions. And Katie and I have both been talking to a lot of employers and some landlords about how to go about opening buildings and businesses back up. So let's move to the next one. So look at local guidance and industry guidance. And Katie had last week, the Arkansas Dental Association put out very specific guidance for dentists. And I think there are similar pieces of information out there for different industries. One of my other partners and I are going to be talking to a group of bankers on Friday, and they've got some specific concerns about letting people in their lobbies. And if we got time, I may talk about a little bit of that in a few minutes, because that might bleed over into some other industries. All right, so stay informed, read your email. I know all y'all get at least 3 emails a day about what's going on, who's opening, what can you do. If you're not on our email list, shoot us an email and we'll get you on it. We've been pushing out information regularly, and our FridayFirm.com website has good information. Watch the governor. I try and watch the first part of the governor's press conference every day to see which way we're going. And again, stay up to date, because if you hadn't heard anything new in 48 hours, you're behind. So how we get people in kind of depends on the layout of the workplace, how dense your employees are, how many customers, vendors, and other third parties are coming in your workplace. One of the issues we'll get into in a little bit is restrooms, and how many restrooms you have per employee, because that's going to tell you how much walking around the people are doing. You know, if you've got a floor with 200 employees in cubes, then that's a lot different than somebody who has a floor with 20 people in separate offices with doors. And if you have, in your normal course of business, customers and vendors and third parties coming into any or all of your work areas, then that's gonna change the way you start doing your business. So primary purpose is employee health and safety. Next purpose is third party or visitor health and safety. The next goal is get your employees back to work and productive. Next goal is to do so in a way that avoids unemployment claims by those who don't return, and to avoid employee lawsuits by those who don't return and by those who do. So here are the things that we get asked about a lot, and I'll tell you what my advice is generally on these things is there's an entry questionnaire that I bet some of y'all have had to fill out in different places, such as my father was in a nursing home, and if I wanted to go in there, I had to fill out a questionnaire, and there is a specific questionnaire on the Arkansas Department of Health website. I don't think for employees that is a necessary document. I did talk with a client yesterday who has a building with 240 employees in it, and they have all been working remotely for the last month and a half. And so they decided as what they wanted to do is have each employee fill out one of those questionnaires before they come back to work. And then after that, they don't have to do so. A lot of people are doing temperature checks. For example, my grandson goes to a school for disabled kids, and so they have one entry, and they have somebody taking the temperature of everybody walking in the door, and they take the kids' temperatures in the car, won't let them out of the car before they come in. Compare and contrast that to my client that I was talking about a minute ago that has 240 employees who have 5 entryways, and their employees may be coming and going all the time, and they decided that it was not worth their time and money to have somebody sitting at an entry all day long with a thermometer taking people's temperatures. Masks are suggested in the OSHA guidelines that everybody should have a mask on in common areas if it's practicable. Now, there might be some people that have some medical condition that says that their doctor would say you shouldn't wear a mask, and we deal with those situations. But it is our advice that anytime an employee is in a common area, they need to have a mask on. I wear mine when I walk in the building. When I sit down at my desk, I take it off. And when I get up to go to the restroom or get something to drink, I put it on. And I'm trying to get myself in that habit, because as we start to roll more employees in and become more dense in the workplace, we're going to all need to have our masks on when we are in a common area.
Mike, I got a question came through. Do the masks have to be supplied by the employer if they're requiring employees to wear masks?
There's no law that requires you to, but what our practice is to have a supply of masks and to tell our employees, if you don't have one already, we'll give you one. And there are hundreds and if not thousands of suppliers of masks all around that you can get them from at reasonably inexpensive rates. And so my first question to somebody who says I don't have one is, why? What have you been doing the last 2 months? But in any event, give them a mask. Gloves are not, in fact, I read a headline of an article a moment or earlier today, said gloves are no defense, and I have not made a practice of wearing gloves, and I don't think that, generally speaking, employers need to require their employees to wear gloves. I'll talk a little bit more in a minute of some things that I think they do need to do. The others are what barriers in the workplace, and maybe that wasn't clear enough. You go in a convenience store, you go in Home Depot, Lowe's, any place like that, and at the checkout counter there's a plastic shield that between you and the checkout person, and they've usually got a slot at the bottom for you to either pay or run your credit card. And so if you're a workplace that has customers coming in and out, and they're dealing with a cashier of any kind or a receptionist of any kind, then you ought to have that barrier put up. They're available all over the place. And we were talking before we started today that I wish I'd have had one of those businesses, because you can, those people are doing well in all this. So here are the problem areas. And I'll go from the bottom of this slide up. Limiting movement. Our policy here is that we have 4 different floors in our building, and our policy is that you don't go from one floor to another to visit other lawyers unless you absolutely have to. Everybody's doing Zoom. We can do Zoom within the office, and we can talk on the phone, whatever, but we don't need to be moving outside our work area, because what that means is if I get sick and I'm only on my hallway, then only my hallway has to go home. But if I'm roaming around 4 different floors of the office and I'm exposing everybody, then we may have a much more serious problem on our hands. The other thing is cleaning, and businesses need to step up what they are doing, cleaning and disinfecting the common areas of the work, doorknobs, especially the entry doors, the restrooms, and so forth. I think, Katie, I think we have a small landlord in a like a 2-story office building, and they were, I think, putting a rule in that no more than 2 people on an elevator. Do I remember that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And we were talking about before, one of the problems we're having is that our landlord has not gotten where it needs to get yet. And so the elevator door opened the other day, and there were 6 people on there without masks. And that's problematic. And so if you have elevators in your office that you have control over, I think that the good rule of thumb is no more than 2 people on an elevator. Restrooms are especially problematic because you don't need a crowd in the restroom, and you don't know when you open the door whether there's nobody there or 4 people in there. And so there are a lot of different things you can do, one of which is to tell people no more than 2 people in the restroom at a time. And so if I walk in, there's already 2 people, then I should, if I'm following the rules, turn around and walk out. The other thing you can do, just simple things, and you can, any outside the box thing, you can set a table by the bathroom door, and it's got a stack of Post-it notes on it, and you tell somebody when you go in the restroom, put a Post-it note on the door. And if there are 2 Post-it notes on the door, don't go in until one of them's removed. People roll their eyes and think I'm not doing that, but we're in for a long haul of a different world. And so I think that's an important thing to do. Two things. We want it to be as safe as it can be for people to stay healthy. The other thing is we want people who are scared naturally to have a reason to be reassured that we're doing things to make it safer. So one of the other things that took me a while before I thought about this, so I eat lunch in my office a lot of times, and with restaurants being closed to in restaurant dining, I'm doing it almost all the time now. And so I'd go in the kitchen and I'd bring my lunch with me, or I'd go get something and bring it back, and I'd go reach in the silverware drawer and get a fork. And, I touched 4 or 5 other ones trying to get one. And so I finally thought to myself, that's not the way I need to be doing it. And so there's the solution to that. The restaurant packets. And so what we are going to do in our kitchen is we're going to get as many of those as we can and lay them out on the counter. So when somebody needs to use silverware, instead of using silverware, they just grab that packet. And so they're not touching something. The other thing is in coffee rooms, we have to figure out what to do. And so, usually around here, one person makes the coffee, sometimes 3 or 4. And so what we're having to do is figure out how to do that. And in this situation, have one person whose task it is to make coffee during the day, and they are to wear gloves when they're making coffee. Put a fresh pair of gloves on when they start making it, take them off and put a fresh pair every time they got to make some more, so that we can minimize that risk. If that doesn't work, we'll ultimately have to simply close the kitchen down. The other thing on One Touch is to keep supplies of wipes and or paper towels by common area doors that need to be open with trash cans. We have a trash can just inside the restroom door, so that when I have to grab the handle, I can have a paper towel to grab the handle, and then I can throw it away right there. All right, let's see what's next. All right, so we want to have some sort of training on use of masks, on use of gloves if necessary, gentle and less than gentle reminders about hand washing. Make sure that we talk to people about how often they should use hand sanitizer, not to touch their face, all the things we've heard, but we need to reinforce that, because it's really hard for people to get used to that different way of life. So the most important thing is make sure your people know what in the world they're supposed to be doing, and make sure that you gently and not so gently remind them. I was walking to get a drink of water right before we started, and one of our paralegals was in the kitchen without a mask on. And I said, "Get your mask." She said, "Nice orange mask." I said, "Go get yours and put it on." We're all gonna have to be a little bit strident with people to get them on board, I think. So you're gonna have some people who don't want to come back to work. And some of you have got people who are probably doing pretty well on unemployment. Some of you have people who have kids at home. Some of you have people who are in risky groups. And some of you have people who just want to work from home. And those issues are going to be ones that we're going to have to deal with for the next month to 6 months. The child care issues, I think, are going to be kind of interesting, because I'm hearing a lot of people who are having trouble with child care because they got teenagers during the summer that they rely on who aren't or can't do it. And we got a bunch of people with kids at home, and they've been home with them for 8 weeks, and they are ready to get out of the house and get back to work. So it's going to be an issue of don't put barriers in people's way to coming back. Make sure that if somebody doesn't want to come back just because they want to get unemployment, that you take away any of their false excuses, any of the things they put up in front of you to justify their not coming back. Because Katie and I have been in contact with the folks at unemployment, and as you heard during the governor's press conference, if you report that they've refused an offer to return to work, they're going to get their unemployment cut off. Now they have the chance to appeal that, but by the time they get that appeal done, they're going to have been out of work and out of unemployment. So that's going to be the best persuader we have, is that they may lose their unemployment. All right, let's move on. So going back to what we said our goals were, what we need to do is make clear offers of recall or reinstatement. And that what I mean, reinstatement from a layoff or recall to the office from working remotely. And we need to make sure that we have emphasized that our goal is for everybody to be safe, and that we are returning them to their same job at the same pay level. Because if we do that and they don't have any specific concerns, specific reasons they can't get back safety wise, basically, then we're in a position where we can report that refusal to unemployment and get them off the unemployment roll.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to pick up where Mike left off there and talk about if we do have an employee who tests positive for COVID-19. So with people coming back to work, there is an increased chance that we will have employees who test positive. And if this happens, you're going to want to treat an employee who tests positive or who's suspected to have a case of COVID-19 the same. The first thing you're going to want to do is isolate the employee who tests positive. So that means they're going to want to stay home and quarantine for 2 weeks until they're released by a doctor. You can require a doctor's note saying that they're safe to return, but I think we all recognize that right now things are a little bit different, so it might not be the formal doctor's note that we're used to getting, so we're going to have to be flexible in what we're requiring there. Second, you're going to want them to tell you all of the people that they've come in contact with who they could have possibly infected. So the CDC is currently recommending that they identify anybody that they would have been within 6 feet of for a prolonged period of time, so 10 or so minutes or more during the last 48 hours before they experience symptoms. And this will depend. So if you have somebody who's sharing tools or sharing kitchens, like Mike referred to earlier, then this could be a little bit of a different circumstance. But basically, you're going to want them to identify anybody who they could have come in contact with, and those people will also need to isolate and self-quarantine at home for 14 days. For both the infected employee and the others who you sent home, you should consider leave options. So this really kind of goes into what Mike was talking about with the Families First Act. If you have fewer than 500 employees, then any employee who tests positive or is sent home to quarantine will fall under that leave, that 2 weeks of paid sick leave. And so that's an option for them. And if they don't fall under the Families First Act, then you could consider other types of paid leave, PTO, vacation, or possibly unpaid FMLA leave or short-term disability, depending on the circumstance. So, and also, as I will discuss later in the presentation, these workers would also qualify for unemployment under the CARES Act. So if there are no other leave options, then that would be something to consider as well. The third thing you're going to want to do is obviously disinfect the workplace. You're going to want to follow CDC guidance closely on this. And as Mike said, that is constantly changing. So, and these things are changing daily. So just follow up with the CDC if this ends up being something you're going to have to deal with on what to do. Right now, they're recommending that you close off any areas that the infected employee would have been in, and that you let those areas, you basically hold off on cleaning that area for 24 hours if possible, and then you use the disinfectants that are approved by OSHA to clean the areas, focusing most especially on common areas and anything that would be touched often by the employee. They also say to expose the area to light and outdoor air if possible, so open up the windows and doors if you can do that. And then you're also going to want to notify the other employees in the building that you've had somebody test positive or potential positive. Now, very important on this, you don't want to reveal the sick individual's name. You're going to want to keep that information confidential under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And to the extent that you can, you're also not going to want to make any indirect references that would allow somebody to guess the identity of the employee. So it's very important to keep it confidential, but you are going to want to let other employees know about what has happened. But equally importantly, you're going to want to tell the other employees the steps that you've taken to protect the other workers and to disinfect the area and all that kind of thing. But you will want to let them know. You can let public health officials and first responders know the identity of the person who tests positive if that comes up. And finally, as Mike mentioned, you'll want to notify customers, vendors, or building management that could have come in contact with the sick employee as well. And again, keeping that name of the employee confidential. So now turning to the question about unemployment benefits, which Mike touched on briefly. So the CARES Act was passed at the end of March, and it greatly expanded the types of unemployment assistance that are available. So right now you have the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, and this is a new program that's designed mostly to help self-employed workers, gig workers, or other workers who wouldn't ordinarily qualify for state benefits. This program just opened up in Arkansas a week and a half or so ago, and so that's expanding who can get benefits. The Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation gives an additional 13 weeks of unemployment benefits to those who would have exhausted their state benefits. And then the Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, so this is that extra $600 weekly benefit that I'm sure y'all have heard about in the news so much, and it runs through the end of July, and it's available to anyone who's receiving any amount of unemployment, whether that's state benefits or that PUA. The CARES Act also expands who is eligible to receive unemployment assistance. So you're eligible under the CARES Act if you are able and available to work and unemployed, or if you're partially unemployed, or if you're unable to work for a covered reason. So the covered reason is really the key area that the CARES Act expands. So it's people who are unemployed or unable to work for reasons connected with COVID-19. And these slides show all the reasons that somebody may be eligible for unemployment for COVID-related reasons. And I won't go through each of them. They're there on your slides. I'll just hit some of the highlights. So you're eligible for unemployment if you're diagnosed with COVID or experiencing COVID-like symptoms and seeking a diagnosis. You're caring for a family member diagnosed with COVID. If you are home taking care of a child whose daycare or school is closed because of COVID. If your office or place of employment is closed as a result of COVID, all of those are reasons that you would be eligible. But probably the most important one is that last one on your slide. If an individual quit as a direct result of COVID-19. And I think we're definitely going to be hearing more about this one over the next few months. As written, it's very broad and would cover a whole host of employees, whether they are immunocompromised themselves, or maybe somebody in their home is, and they're just worried about coming back to the workplace for fear of exposing somebody in their household to it. So as written, like I said, it's pretty broad, and we're to be seen as to how it will be applied. So because there is this extra $600 weekly benefit going on unemployment through the end of July, some employers are facing what we've been calling the $600 dilemma. So their employees are making more at home than they would be at work. And so they're having trouble getting them to come back to work or keeping them at work because of this. So what can you do in this situation? And Mike talked about this a little bit, but an employee can only receive benefits if they quit for good cause, and they can only continue to receive benefits if they've been out on unemployment if they reject a job offer for good cause. So DWS recently has made clear that staying on unemployment simply because you're making more at home, that's obviously not good cause, and they'll cut people off benefits if they get an alert that that's what's happening. And an unreasonable fear of contracting the virus is also not good cause. Now the key word here is unreasonable. So you have to be showing that what you're doing, you're making the workplace safe for them to come back. And the more things that you can do to show that and put that in some kind of letter that you push out to your employees, like Mike mentioned, the more that you can show that an employee would not have good cause in staying home and staying on unemployment benefits. So, and in case where an employee is staying home because it's financially better for them to be on unemployment, an employer can treat that quit or refusal to come back to work as a resignation, and DWS would likely deny them unemployment benefits for that. Now, it will be a closer question for high-risk employees. So you're going to want to do all that you can to make it safe for them. As Mike said, offer accommodations where you need to, possibly continuing remote work for somebody who is high risk, or offering different shifts, or even a potential, position change for the short term, to show that you've worked with the employee and done what you can to make it more safe for them. So this slide discusses the steps you should take when considering bringing folks back from unemployment. So these were going to be important to protect you against future unemployment claims, and they will also be potentially helpful for you if you have taken out a PPP loan, they can help you make sure you get PPP loan forgiveness. So the first thing you're going to want to do is develop a plan to reopen that would provide for a safe work environment. So basically do all the things that Mike has talked about doing and communicate all of that to your employees, and basically just make sure you have a good game plan going in. The next thing you're going to want to do is prepare a return to work letter. You're going to want to have certain things in writing before folks come back. So things like the start date, the hours, the wages, the steps that you're taking to create a safe work environment. I think that point is important for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's just generally good for morale. It's going to make people more comfortable coming back. You know, we're seeing a lot of folks whose employees are generally, you know, and genuinely fearful of coming back. And I think that showing what you're doing and also kind of help pushing out accurate information about the steps that you can take to be safe are, you know, important. Just getting that message out there. And as we've mentioned, it will also help show that a refusal to come back to work was not for good cause, which will help set you up to defend an unemployment claim. You'll also want to include in that letter a method for employees to communicate concerns or request for accommodations and that kind of thing, just to make sure that you have an open door policy going into this. Third, you're going to want to document anybody's refusal to return to work. And you know, you're going to want to show that you've tried to work with the employee, as we've talked about, to offer accommodations or, you know, just outside the box approaches to make them comfortable. And if ultimately that doesn't work, you are going to want to have written documentation about that. And finally, you will want to report the refusal to DWS. Now, I mentioned that all of this kind of fits into the PPP, and that is the Payroll Protection Program that was passed as part of the CARES Act. So for employers with fewer than 500 employees, the PPP made loans available that may be forgivable in part or, you know, or 100%. So these loans are forgivable if the borrower meets certain conditions, and those include using the loan for 75% for payroll and then otherwise for rent and utilities. But importantly, to get full forgiveness, you have to maintain the same number of employees and not reduce employee pay. So this requirement comes into play when you have employees who are refusing to come back, either because they're fearful or they want to stay on unemployment. So the SBA and Treasury recently announced an important exception to this forgiveness rule that is helpful for employers. So in this case, if a borrower offers to rehire an employee and the employee refuses the offer, this will not count against the borrower in terms of loan forgiveness. And I think this is this is very important for businesses who've gotten these PPP loans, because I know they were really worried about what they were going to do if their employees put them in a tough spot for the loan forgiveness. So in order to receive this or to fall within this exception, you have to do a couple things. You have to make sure that that written offer of rehire is in writing. So that's why you're going to want to make sure you have that return to work letter. You have to make sure that the return to work offer is for the same pay and for the same number of hours, which is what Mike mentioned earlier. And then finally, you're going to want to document the employee's rejection of that offer so that you can provide that to your bank when you're applying for loan forgiveness. So that's just something to think about if you have a PPP loan, that there has been a little flexibility out there offered by Treasury. And I would also just note here too that Treasury has just issued its full guidance on loan forgiveness within the last couple of days. So that might be of interest to folks as well. And the final thing I'll talk about today is the shared work program. We have been helping a lot of clients sign up for this program. It's administered through DWS, and we found it particularly useful in the pandemic, just helping people either reduce hours or even bring folks back, but not full time. So I'll kind of explain how it works and how we've seen it work and some common questions that we've gotten. So this is a program, like I said, that's administered through the Department of Workforce Services, and you can reduce an employee's hours by up to 40%. You can reduce them anywhere between 40% and 10%. And it allows an employee to receive their wages that they would receive working those reduced hours, plus a part of their partial unemployment benefits through the state. And through the end of July, they will receive a $600 weekly benefit through the CARES Act. So they end up receiving quite a bit of benefit. So most employees are either made whole or close to it. And employees can be on this program for up to 25 weeks. As I said, we have found this to be particularly helpful in this COVID-19 era. So for employees, like I said, that they are receiving, close to what they would be making on full-time work, if not more than that in some cases. And for employers, it's helpful because their experience ratings are not affected because this program is paid for at the federal level by the CARES Act. So employers' accounts are not going to be affected. And equally important, employers can keep employees on the payroll so they can easily call them back and so they can maintain, the key talent and not lose, critical employees during all this. So it really is a win-win for employer and employee. In terms of the requirements, I think the main thing and the main requirement is that you can't have laid off any employees within the last 4 months. So, so this program won't work for anybody who's already done furloughs or layoffs, but if you've only reduced hours or if you haven't laid anybody off yet, I think this is a good program to consider. The employee must otherwise be eligible to receive state benefits, and the employer must certify that they would have laid off at least 10% of employees in the work shared program if they had not implemented the program. Just in terms of the mechanics and how it works, you do have to submit an application to DWS. It's a fairly straightforward application where you just provide the list of employee names that you would want to be on the program. And then DWS will look through that and approve the application. We're finding that it's taking them a little bit longer these days. They're buried in these applications right now because so many people are taking advantage of it, but they're working really hard over there, and they've been able to get back in touch with us usually within about 2 weeks. And the nice thing about this is even if it takes them 2 weeks, they are backdating benefits, so you can get the benefit of the program really from the date that you submit that application. And then your employees would sign up.
Hang on, Katie. I gotta tell on you. I want everybody to know Katie and the guy who are running the shared work program have got each other on speed dial.
That is true.
We got real lucky and got some relationships there, and so we've been able to learn a lot from those folks. They're great. They're great assistants over there. Whatever you hear about the DWS people, they're trying their best. I promise.
They are. I've got to brag on him a little bit. I get most of my emails back from him on Friday evenings or Saturday mornings. So, I mean, he is working some long hours, and but they've been very helpful and really want to make sure that folks in the state are getting their benefits or getting on these programs. So they're doing what they can to be flexible with folks. So they've been great to work with. And then the kind of final thing to mention is you do have to submit weekly certifications about hours worked and that kind of thing. So there is a little bit of an administrative lift on this, but like I said, I think that it has turned out to be worth it for most of our clients because they have been able to reduce hours to help the company, but also the employees are made whole. And just a few questions that we've gotten multiple times on this. So the first one is, my employees are higher earning, will they still be eligible to receive state unemployment benefits on a shared work program? And the answer to this is yes. So the beauty of this program is that typically if you are working part-time, you can only receive benefits or unemployment benefits if you're making less than 140% of what your weekly benefit would be. And what that translates to in real life is you can't make more than about $630 a week and get any kind of unemployment benefits, which is hard to do for some people who are a little bit higher earning. This program eliminates that requirement. So no matter what you would make, you still get some state benefits, which means you're entitled to that $600 weekly benefit, which is good for folks. You can apply for the shared work program if you've already reduced employee hours or pay, but not if you have already furloughed folks. And you can apply for the shared work program now and implement it later. I've got a couple of clients who are doing that. They know, just seasonally, they're going to maybe have a ramp up in the summer, but they'll go back to kind of a slower pace in the fall, or kind of, predicting that COVID might have more impacts in the fall again. So they're trying to think ahead, and they're planning a shared work program for the fall. And the shared work program can work for exempt employees. It's typically, it's geared toward hourly employees, but the DWS folks have worked with us on this, and so you would just kind of key it off of a 40-hour work week. And really the only thing to consider if you do that is if you're reducing hours or pay for an exempt employee, you might get them to a non-exempt status. And so you'd want to make sure you're, following all the rules if that were the case. And then the final question is, what if I choose to lay off employees after I create a shared work program? And you really can't do that. So you're going to want to make sure you think through, I guess, your long-term plan on this before implementing a program. You can only make changes to 10% of the people on the program. So you're not going to want to lay anybody off after you start the program, or else you'll be ineligible for the program. Mike, do you have anything to add on any of that?
No, ma'am. Anybody got any questions or thoughts or comments on how remote work has gone?
Well, we are not seeing anything come through the chat. I had a question. You talked about documentation. Is that something that needs to be done like throughout the entire process, or just if like an employee is not wanting to come back? Do you need to document that you sent the notifications, or if you have a survey like that one company did, like documenting all of that information? How much is too much, or where's that line of what you should keep for records versus not?
Well, I think that the first communication notifying employees that you're reopening needs to be a all employee communication. Here's what our schedule is. Here's what our plan is. Here's what our goals are. Laying everything out. Our firm sent out an email to all employees and to outline everything that's involved, and to say it may change tomorrow. So that initial communication needs to go out. And then if we have somebody who refuses to come back, that's kind of a discreet, here's what you told us, here's what we offered you, you still won't come back.
Okay, so that should be in written form versus a phone call?
Absolutely, because what you need to do is be able to attach that to communication to the unemployment folks.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other questions come through the chat, so we're gonna go ahead and wrap up here just a couple minutes early. So Mike and Katie, want to thank you both very much for taking the time out of today and your busy schedule to give us an hour here to talk about these issues. As we're getting back to business here in Northwest Arkansas, we know that this is going to be some concerns and questions. So thank you for those that were able to attend, as well as thank you to our sponsor, Cox Communications, for sponsoring all of our C2C programming that we are doing both in person and virtual throughout the year. So thank you all very much. We will be recording this session, or have recorded this session, and we'll be releasing it for members that need this information as well. So thank you guys again, Mike and Katie. Thank you very much, and we will see you all next time at the next Chamber to Community C2C webinar. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, John.
Thank you.